I do want to watch so whoever's presenting is going to be all along. Okay. We get lonely. So they're going to watch the other presentation. Yeah. And since we're a small group, maybe if you guys want to move in to the front, it'd be nice. Hear each other easily. Is it okay for us to start? We're going to make a little research now. You're showing first.
No, last. We'll just ask them.
You're going first. All right.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Anna. I'm working with research. This is the live from Educational Studies Project. Studies Project is a monthly series hosted by Movement Research and the basic evening dance that our artists instigated and are all about discussion and discourse. All about discussion and discourse. Thanks for giving me for having us here. We love being in this space. Careful with it. We are audio recording this discussion tonight so that it can be podcasted, so that other people who are not able to be here can listen. And it is being live streamed for a live stream audience. That being said, if you remember to say your name before you speak, that's awesome, so that when people are listening to this in the future, they know who's speaking. And if you have any concerns about something you said at the end of the night, you can talk to me or Levi, and we can figure out, talk to you about what that means. If it's strike from the record, whatever that means. So feel free to come up to us. Let's see. One note, the elevator in this building stops running at 8 p.m. So if there are stairs, obviously, that you can use, but if you need to use the elevator, we'll make a quick announcement around 7:45 for you to go make sure that gets there is a merch table, a very small merch table right here. You might see that. And we are selling tote bags tonight. $5 for a black tote bag designed by Von Meyer. $10 for this lovely red tote bag. There's also movement research brochures for the fall winter season, and you can be a friend of movement research for as little as $10. That being said, the studies projects are free events, and if you feel so inclined to throw a couple bucks, we'll have a bag at the end of the night. So anything truly helps. And without further ado, this is fellow Alice Foster, and I think this studies project was proposed.
Coming and participating. This program is a bit of an experiment, and I think I'd like to start just by reading two anecdotes about it. A few weeks ago, there was a performance at Judson Church, and I was talking with some of the dancers afterwards, and about music and dance. I said, well, you like live music or recorded music? Oh, live music. Why do you like live music? And she said, well, because live music it's like dance, it's in the moment. If I hear recorded music with a performance, it's not what's happening. So she had her own reasons for being interested in live music, and everybody, I think, probably has a different interest. So we can expect a kind of variety of discussions and presentations about collaborating between musicians and dancers. Last Sunday I was at the performance program, and one of the dancers said, she said, I'm really scared about performing solo. So what I do experiences and insights. What I would like to do, though, before we hear from the panelists who are going to show a video of their program and do 3 sets of this, for the people who are not on the panel, so come to hear, if you would like, would you care to introduce yourself and explain a little bit as to what interests you about the program, so the panelists will know what your interests are, and then they can, in their presentations, perhaps respond to those. So would anybody care to introduce themselves and say what their interests might be in dance and music?
Sure, I'll start. I'm Megan Tenzior. I work for Movement Research as the development manager, and I also make work. And so I'm interested in this live fusing of artists in the way that your collaborative potential meets music and dance.
Would you care to say something?
Yeah, hi, my name is Emily. I'm actually visiting from Australia, Melbourne, and I'm just starting off making my own work, and I'm very interested in live music with my work. I'm not really sure why yet, but it's always been my first preference.
Hi, my name is Julia Croft. I'm from New Zealand. I'm an actress and a theatre maker, but I'm interested in physical theatre or dance theatre and stuff. I'm here studying with City Company, and I guess I'm interested in the practicalities of in a making process when you're in the room with musicians and dancers or actors, performers. Practically how that process works, incorporating so it's not performance with music layered on top or vice versa, but you're kind of devising both at the same time.
Hi, I'm Yasmin. I'm from Taiwan, and I'm very interested in between the live music collaborate with dance team. So I'm just here to see what's going on and present better for the performance.
I'm Cecilia. I'm a dancer and a research scientist. I practice dance improvisation, so my question is, how do we generate movement? Where does movement come from? And I'm very interested in the influence that music plays on the production of movement. How are we influenced? Dance, music makes us move, but I'm not satisfied by that. So I'm here to explore more about this question.
My name is Leonie, and I'm a friend of Melanie. So I come to listen and support.
My name is Yukunda, and I'm Leonie's mother. And we're visiting, so we live in Belgium. And I'm an amateur dancer, so not a professional, so I'm more in the audience when professionals are dancing on stage. And in Belgium, we have a lot of companies who use live music and like CD Library, Shakari, and so they use vocal music, medieval music, and this kind of thing. So I like it very much because live music has an authenticity, I think. So this is what I'm interested in. And then once the experience to dance on stage with a big orchestra. So also knowing how it is when you're a dancer on stage and you have a big orchestra with ballet. So it really lifts you to another level.
I'm Elisa Weeks. I'm actually on the panel. So
Okay.
So let's see. Would you care to?
Oh, sure. My name is Taka. I am a maker and dancer. I'm curious to hear the process, the collaborating process between dancer and the musician. When I make work, I don't usually use music, so I'm just curious to hear that.
Hi. My name is Mizuru, and I think I'm a singer, also dancer, and I'm interested to make singing and dancing same time, and I'm exploring about that. And then I can hear.
being here, your interest. And I think we'll just then begin with Douglas Dunn and Stephen Taylor to show their video. You all set for that? And this will be about 4 or 5 minutes. And then I'll invite them up to the presentation.
it's the end of the night, and the Apollo or the sun is beginning to intrude on their bliss. And then usually there's a cuckolded husband or a night watchman warming around, or someone who has a voice. And it was a sort of typical form of that period. Now, when we started, Douglas told me that the working title was Abad. That's all he said to begin with. And I knew what that was in terms of the history of romantic music, which is it's the counterpart to the nocturne. But then I started looking into it and got into the whole medieval thing, which I really love. It's a period of music and art that I just really love. And we started going there, and I immediately wrote 4 or 5 pieces on medieval ideas, none of which worked.
Yeah, there are quite a few sections of the piece. I don't remember the number, maybe.
I'm going to say 9 or 10 pieces.
9 or 10 sections. And completely against my 40 years of Vedic dances up to this piece, I actually had an idea before I started to work. And the idea was first based on a mountain, which I used to, it wasn't really a mountain, but I saw it as a mountain. When I was a kid, I lived where there was a very steep, big hill, and I used to test myself by running up and down it. And I had this image, I wanted to put this in a dance. And when I had the opportunity suddenly to have this huge stage and money, which I, to produce something, I wanted to have this mountain. But luckily we had a residency at the Rauschenberg Foundation in Florida, and I experimented with this mountain with clay in a small form. And by the time we left there, I realized it would be really stupid to try to put a mountain on stage. It just filled up a lot of space and looked stupid. So instead, I talked to Charles Atlas, who's the person who did the costumes, the lighting, and the visuals, the projections on this piece. Someone I've worked with for many years, actually. And he made the mountain for me and many other things. So this is this section on education. The thing we had in common with this section, I would say, was that I knew it would be a lot of unison. I was working off how much I disliked school. I actually did like school. The first few years I went to a very progressive school where we had a lot of recess and not much academics. But then suddenly I was thrown into a very, very rigid school in San Francisco where they had a set of grass and trees and recess. We had wire fences and concrete playgrounds and walking double file to class and stuff like that. And homework, jeez, I couldn't believe it. So from that time on, I did enjoy education, being educated very much. And so I wanted to actually represent that in a neat way. It's not very literal, but it had. And the guy in front, that's Christopher Williams, who's danced with me for many years. He is a character throughout the piece who comes in and out and doesn't do what anybody else does. He's the odd person out in quite a few of the sections. At the end, we integrate him slightly, but and so he's showing my agony as a student, and the other people are the good students who are dancing, being in unison, being together, being good kids. So musically, I said,
he said he wanted something mechanical, but sort of drudgery mechanical. But from earlier conversations with Douglas, I knew that one thing was he didn't want the music to drive the dance. So, for example, at one point I discussed using percussion, so he was a little hesitant to do that because he didn't want the drums to drive the dance. He wanted to have a balance. So, when he asked for something mechanical, I was working then with, I had begun working with the composer and pianist, electronic musician, Jerome Bagan, and Jerome had a kind of box of tricks. I asked him for a tick-tock. We tried various tick-tocks. I thought we would do a clock. So that was the beginning. So it kind of goes against the overall aesthetic in some ways, but it is that sense of mechanic.
But I don't mind going against. So then, if you could play the measure length or whatever it is about this piece, because this piece turned out to be unbelievably hard for the dancers to count. They had to count every beat. You see, they had to stay together. The way to do that is to give them a beat. But then instead of making measure lengths all the same length, Stephen did
Well, I went 2 against 3. I made it in 6/8 so I could go 2 against 3. You can count from 2 or 3. And that through.
So it made it very hard for the dancers to hear the measure lengths. And I didn't actually work to the music, correct?
No, it was the tango where I threw in the odd measure.
Well, then,
Right?
you didn't have trouble counting this too?
Yes.
Wasn't this also very difficult to count because it just didn't have its sense of arc of measure.
Yeah, it's also very repetitive.
Yes. So they had a rough time, but it was very exciting when they got it, especially toward the part where they go to the floor there. For the first 20 times we tried it, at the end of the rehearsal process, they were never together. And then just in time, just in time before the show, they got that, which is very satisfying. What else?
Why live music?
Why live music? Why not? If you can afford it. I've worked every which way. I came out of the, I don't know if you know history, but I came out of the Cunningham Cage scene in the late 60s, early 70s. And I was thrilled when I came to New York in '68 to see dancing that was not supported by music. That was a breakthrough moment in my aesthetic perception of things. The idea that dance can stand on its own was just thrilling to me, and it also has many practical advantages, like you don't have to rehearse, with music, and you don't have to deal with other people. It's like not having lighting rehearsals. You just dance. It's great. And I didn't know, all the thing about why Mitch did that, but so I worked in silence in the beginning. Then I worked with various live electronic musicians, and then in the middle '80s, I suddenly said to myself, well, I've never liked watching dancing to music, but what if I tried it? Maybe I could make a version that I thought was interesting. So I became a collaborator with Tower Records, which you never even heard of, but it was the audio store in New York for many years. It had every CD you could imagine. So I started making things to music, and now I'm about to make a piece to Bach Suite, so I'm actually going terribly backwards, becoming a retrograde conservative. One of our gardens. But this collaboration, every collaboration is different. But, this one had a kind of warmth that I really enjoyed. First of all, Stephen is a very, very broadly accomplished musician and scholar in the music world. And I knew I wanted to work with him on this project because I knew he could do anything. He had such a variety of possibility. And I knew this piece was going to be like that every section was going to have a different need, musically speaking. And so that was very, I made a good choice, you might say, because we in every section we talked through what it might be, and in every case he came up with various things, some of which I found possible or not possible. And sometimes it was possible, but I even was daring enough. Usually I like to collaborate with people. You do your thing, I'll do my thing, and we'll throw it together. I like that. But in this case, I wanted to work more closely with the material. And I cared more about, I actually had an idea about these different sections. And I had even sometimes an idea about what music might be like. For example, when we were in Captiva, the Rauschenberg situation, Stephen played various things. I don't even know think about the piece exactly. And I said, oh, I really like that one. I immediately had an idea about what it could be. I had this section called the ballet section. And I wanted it to be very like a dungeon. I wanted it to be the ballet section was not as full of negativity as the education section, so to speak, but to me it was very dark. The idea was very dark. The ballet was this ideal form, but then it became dark instead of light. And so I wanted this music, which,
No. I can describe it.
Yeah.
I had been reading Gertrude Stein about 20 years ago, and there's this wonderful anecdote where she says, I was talking to Charlie Chaplin, and I was saying the best thing is when nothing happens. In fact, that's why dogs howl at the moon, because it doesn't do anything. So I had this idea to do music that doesn't go anywhere, some vague idea like that. And I wrote a series of pieces that were full of holes. There would be a riff and then a long silence. And one of those pieces became the ballet, or it has a bass note that goes bum, 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 and in between, and with a long period, separated by little melodic riffs, of which there are only 3, in a clarinet. So he said, I love that, it's so nothing. So that was the first piece he started to work with. And then Douglas's idea was, you'll sit on stage and play that on the piano to do it live. So that's what a lot of music people do. You sit on stage and play it live. I said, okay. And then as we went along, we realized we could actually, we had a budget. And I said, well, we can hire, we can have a quartet. And he said,
yeah, we actually, the live idea actually developed gradually through the collaboration. We weren't necessarily thinking that way at the beginning.
And there was one point in the conversation early on where I thought I might be just consulting on what kind of recordings he wanted to use.
Right, that's true.
It was very sort of open situation. It wasn't like, I want you to compose an hour and a half of music for this piece that we started.
Which in fact he ended up doing. Yeah, I just want to try to evoke a little more about the ballet section. So the ballet section had 4 dancers? Anyway, not the whole cast by any means, not this huge crowd. And this music is going like a drowned sound. And the ballet section, they barely get to dance. It's a little bit dancer's choice. They had to stand like this. And I told them, I didn't dribble the length, but I said, stand there for a long time. Don't do anything. Just stand there, Then they had a couple moves from that, and they just changed. And then they had some phrases, very jumpy phrases, but they only got to do them a few times, right? I mean, it was very, very spare and very sort of static. This deep sound. And then, again, there was a projection on the back, which had, you saw that line at the end, there were some big things that were, you couldn't tell what they were, and then gradually they formed the word ballet in huge letters, like bigger than the heads. And then the whole thing grew.
The first thing Douglas asked me for after he had fixed on the ballet was a tango. And so I thought, what's the least you can do and have a tango? And I realized the least you can do and have a tango is 2 dotted quarter notes and a quarter note. So we started with that. And then built this kind of minimalist tango on it. And then I'd seen Charles Atlas piece where he had done a Beach Boys song, Wouldn't It Be Nice? And it was just so joyful. And I thought, I'm going to drop the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations right into the middle of this tango. But then I realized I only had my voice. But then I thought, you know what, I'm going to drop Roy Orbison into the middle of this tango, because I can do Roy, because I have a similar register and a similar manner. So I dropped a piece of Blue Bayou into the middle of the piece, which goes well in a tango because it has that kind of Latin 3 against 2 inside.
So again, the education is toward the beginning of the piece. I think it's the second section, and the tango is later in the piece. And they're both large group sections, which included 8 students. 8 students from Montclair State we incorporated into the piece. That's gave me a chance to do big group sections. And in that, the progression in this piece, which is, again, trying to get conventional, or trying not to, but getting conventional, is that the extreme unison of the education section is then slightly changed in the tango, because in the tango, even though it's a unison duet in a way, it gets mixed up. I made 2 different duet phrases, and then I mixed them, and the people change partners and so on. So it was another unison section, a large group, chunky section, but it was more complex choreographically than the first one. And again, impossible to count. Thanks, man.
And then we had these wonderful musicians. We had the cellist composer Hyun Kim, who I wrote on another piece. And so I wanted each of the musicians to have a piece of improvised music that they led. And so Hyun had a piece toward the end with you and Paul, and Cleek Shrey had a piece at the beginning. He's a fiddler, but he plays something like a hardanger fiddle. It's a fiddle that has 5 strings, and it has the range of the viola as well as the range of the violin. And it also has sympathetic strings in it, so it has this beautiful ringing tone. And so Douglas choreographed the fiddler in the opening scene, moving among the dancers. So not only were the bodies of the dancers on stage during the piece, but at that point, the one of the musicians was choreographing along that.
Yeah, the musicians were stationed upstage left, quite on stage, and then for this first section, Pleak wandered among them. It's a duet.
Let me interrupt for a second. In terms of the format for this evening, if anyone has a question they'd like to ask about this performance and discussion in particular, maybe you could ask it now. But if it's a more general type question, we can wait until the end of the evening and have more general discussion. Everybody's agreed to that. So does anybody have a particular specific question about what Doug or Steve was saying they'd like to ask now?
Okay, moving on.
I just wondered why you chose that particular section to talk about your collaboration.
Yeah, Jules, why did you choose that section?
Stephen wanted to.
I like that.
Well, it shows a big group. It shows a relationship with music, which we were talking about.
There's a lot of variety.
Yeah, the piece is quite varied. Each section is quite different in tone, mood, musically, and there's some sections like the ballet. And here we're on the beat. In the ballet section, there was no rhythmic relationship in a specific way between the music and the dancing. Tango again was a beat we needed to keep everybody together. But there's several.
And also you can see all the musicians on stage in this clip.
Yes, that was another choice.
When and where was this shown?
So Montclair State University at the Castle Theater, which is a beautiful, beautiful 10-year-old theater on the campus.
In January of this year.
Okay.
A lot of my work is interactive, so as part of this, I have something to give you guys. So if you take one,
This is Lisa Weeds and Katie Brown. Let's go collaborate.
We'll explain what this is in a second. Let's start just by telling them how the collaboration started.
I think we're going to start talking, if it's okay to start, just because of the nature of the video.
And also the work.
Sure.
The work is site specific. We did it at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And how it came about is the Brooklyn Botanic Garden invited me to create a work for their gala in 2013. And the gala was celebrating the expansion of the Native Floral Garden, which is one of the oldest sections in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. If you can go. It's really beautiful. You really kind of forget that you're in the city, except there's every now and then you hear Flatbush Avenue and all the trucks and traffic on Flatbush Avenue. But within that, it's a magical little spot in the garden. And when they approached me about it, they sort of showed me two things. One was Ana Mendieta. I don't know if you guys know her. She's a Cuban artist, an amazing Cuban artist who unfortunately is no longer here. But she did a lot of work in nature. Google her, look at her. She does really incredible, very powerful work. And they showed me some of her images, but a lot of it she's naked with nature. And the Brooklyn Botanic Garden is this very, very conservative place, so it's kind of like, well, are you okay if I'm naked? And yeah, especially for your cocktail gala, when you have all your guests coming around. And so we couldn't do nudity. And then they also said that they wanted a mandolin as part of it. And that they wanted to call the piece Enchanted Garden. And so I had those sort of three things happening. And I was like, well, I don't know a mandolin player, but I know an amazing ukulele player who I've been wanting to work with for a very, very long time. The other thing they actually had me watch is a short documentary on Daryl Morrison, who's a landscaper who really focuses on integrating native plants into landscape. He's a huge advocate for planting plants from the location. Because otherwise you could just be anywhere. It could be, it's like, that plants really show you, give you a sense of place, as opposed to if you don't use native plants, you could be, it's like a strip mall. You could be anywhere. So he's a huge advocate for using the plants that are indigenous to an area. And there's a beautiful documentary about him called In the Prairie Spirit, Planting in the Prairie Spirit. So I watched that, and so part of my thinking in creating this piece was how could I do something that really integrated with the environment and wasn't imposing an idea either with sound or with movement into an environment, but how can I really kind of create an orchestra of sound and movement that went with what was already there, as opposed to standing out. And so in talking with them, I said, well, I know this amazing ukulele player who also plays a number of other instruments. And I also knew that Katie has a background in sound therapy. And for me, that was also really important because I felt she would bring a sensitivity to the project of really being able to listen to the environment and to the concept that we were working with and really augment that. And it actually rained torrentially the day that we did the performance. So in 2013, so we actually ended up having to perform it inside. It was kind of crazy. We had 3 versions of the piece. And we actually weren't able to do the one in the garden, and so they were really happy with what we had created, so I sort of pitched them, well, we really liked it, could we do it in summer of 2014? And fortunately, they said yes. So it's site-specific. It happens in 6 different locations within the garden. It's 4 dancers, 4 musicians, and each dancer represented a different ecosystem. One was pine barrens, another was sort of deciduous forests, another was prairie grass, and the other was sphagnum bogs, which is a type of moss. And so I kind of gave all this research of information that I'd done to Katie and went, here.
So I was really super excited to work with Edisa for the first time, and so the reason why we're talking first is to sort of give you a little bit of context for what you see, because there's snippets, and then it sort of culminates in sort of a larger ensemble piece. So initially, we had this idea and this is what happened, that the audience would travel through parts of the garden, and that the ensemble of musicians would also go to different landing posts. And then when we realized the trajectory and the logisticalness of it, we decided we're not going to do it that way, which actually was kind of a last minute decision a little bit. So I had to rewire my brain to figure out how the music was going to fit with the musician. So what we decided to do is actually pair one musician with one dancer, which ended up being a really interesting thing, very different than the original concept. And then eventually all of us came together for the larger piece at the end. So in each site, you had a sort of relationship between this, well, the relationship was sort of the threesome. It was the oral or foursome, the physical environment, the dancer in the physical environment, the oral environment, and the musician in the oral environment. And then the audience, I guess, is the quintet. And so a lot of it was structured improv, written specifically in terms of, we're going to start with this instrument, you're going to use this amount of silence, when the dancer does this, you're going to take this instrument out. So every instrumentalist had about 3 or 4 other instruments besides their main instrument. So we had a saxophone player, we had a violinist, we had myself playing a couple of different percussion instruments, and then we had another sort of other kind of percussionist. So 2 percussion, violin, and saxophone. Thank you. Sorry. So and we also picked up a lot of different things. We had melodicas, we used voice, we used flute, we did a lot of different things. So. And then for each environment, I chose different instruments. So each instrument instrument had sort of an environmental sound to it. So there's a lot of like kind of more ethereal sounds, sounds that have a nature kind of quality to them, elemental quality to them. You'll see one installation where one of the instrumentalists has a bunch of gongs and bells, and we hang the instruments on this fallen tree, so it looks like it's part of the environment, and then she's playing it. So that's sort of the intention around that. We had a lot of fun with it. So
I guess it felt a lot of trust.
Yeah.
I think the only time I kind of said I want this specifically was in the very last section, because I wanted the audience to play along. And then initially you had created a 5/8, which I thought would be a little bit of a challenge for people who are not necessarily musicians. So I just asked if that could be shifted to a 6/8. So that was one. I think that was the only kind of real.
Yeah, and the music changed. The music very much changed because of that, because of the meter change, and also it was a year later, so we changed a few things up. You know, different musicians, and just different kind of things. So yeah, I don't know what else to say. We'll just show you a little clip, and then if you guys have questions.
Is this the original or
This is the redo.
This is the redo that we actually
Yes.
do.
No, yeah.
So what I should
Tried to
explain.
train, but it didn't.
Yeah. There's like touch and go whether it actually happened. But so when the audience happened, they were divided into 4 sections, and so they would go through the garden simultaneously. So there were 4 different groups that would go through the garden simultaneously, and then they would come together for the 2 final sections. And so it's about, I think, 40 minutes altogether.
Yeah.
And so you're going to see 3 minutes. I'll jump around a bit because we're trying to just show you the different stations and just give you a sense of the entire work.
A couple of questions. Did you rehearse in the gardens? So you were making like literally with the environment?
Both. The garden was challenging in the sense that they, for the most part, do not do performances there. They consider themselves museum for art, for the preservation and research in plants and flowers, and not a performance venue.
Yeah.
And so normally when they do performances, it's for like 1,000+ people, and it's not in the garden. And the curators there have been very, very, very resistant to having live performance or site-specific performance in the garden, because that's not what we're about. We're about plants.
Yeah.
And so this is probably like the second. Venero Castro has done something there. This was the second thing that they've done there that was sort of like a boutique performance. But part of that, it's a younger generation of curators coming in. Like Uli, who's a curator for the Native Flora Garden, is amazing. If he teaches classes, take his class. He's just so knowledgeable. Or he does tours in the Native Flora Garden. And everything from like, oh, this used to be make root beer, or this plant works with this ant to get pollinated, but it needs to have this other plant because it's all part of the ecosystem. And he's just so knowledgeable about plants and flowers, and he was very open. He's also a contra dancer, so I think that helped. And that he was like, sure. I mean, I had to be careful. I met with him and we talked about where we could be, that we wouldn't damage the plants. I kind of had to really argue for one location because it just was so beautiful. Because initially we were going to be looking at a fence, and I was like, can we at least look out over the expanse of the garden? But we had to be really careful about where the dancers stepped. So with that, I had to give the dancers some leeway. But as part of that, I couldn't rehearse it very often because there are people walking through, and it's not a performance venue. So we probably had one rehearsal with the dancers, and then another rehearsal with the musicians, and then we were on.
Where did you go to the indoor rainy day?
In part of the new part of the garden is their visitor center. So we're inside in the visitor center, which is a big glass and wood floor.
That big place with the cloud.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's very different.
Yeah, but that's an interesting space.
It is.
It is, but it's not outside.
No, it's not relevant to your thing.
No, it still worked, but it's just interesting. I don't know if you've ever performed at cocktails. Cocktails is really about people schmoozing and getting drunk and making connections. And the art is just sort of like in second nature. So I was really happy that you could do it as a real performance, not just as a cocktail hour.
I was wondering, how did you compose the sound? As in, did you tell the musicians to work together with the dancer and sort of improvising, like looking at the movement, or did they come with a specific quality they were wanting to bring? How did that work?
A little bit of both. So, Edison, I went off videos of rehearsals. So I made a map, musical map. Figure out I'm going to do this. These are the instruments that we're going to use for this dance. These are the instruments that we're going to use for that dance. And then I spoke with the musicians. We had one rehearsal. We looked at the video. We worked sort of a little bit, doing an improvisation using the concepts where there will be silence, where we're going to pick up this sound. What's the element that we're dealing with? Is it wind? Is it water? Is it earth? There's metal. So I'm working sort of in that context. And then the musicians, because there's improv there, of course I want to get their feedback. So they gave me some ideas of what to bring, and yeah, so it was very much a collaboration in that way. There were some specifics. You saw the one with the man that was doing like a creaking sound and picking straw. That's very, very specific. And that's the very beginning of it. And I was very clear about it. It was specific in that this is when you're using this instrument and this is when you're using that instrument. And then you go off when she moves here is when you put it down, and then you pick up the saxophone, and then the saxophone is played in this mode. Beyond that, then I gave them carte blanche to kind of go, right? Because you're trusting the musicians to be able to dialogue. And these are, very professional, top of the line musicians in New York City. So, I'm just giving them a wide berth to be able to do it, and then with Edison's feedback to be able to see what it was, and and then figure out how we want to hone that in a little bit. I mean, that's generally how it went.
I mean, there was a lot of trust because it was interesting. We did it first for just members only of the garden, and then the second time we did it, it was for the general public. But for that rehearsal, it actually rained that day, so we actually ended up having to rehearse in the visitor center. And it was the first time the musicians could actually see what each other was doing, and that how it all worked together. Because otherwise, they were just sort of separate parts of the jigsaw puzzle, and even the dancers to a certain degree were just separate parts of the big puzzle. I had sort of seen everything, but even Katie, because she was in it as a musician, hadn't seen everything, how it worked. And so it was actually nice to have that rehearsal in the visitor center so we could go, oh, okay, this is how the jigsaw puzzle comes together.
And it worked. I mean, it really actually did really well. It felt very cohesive song.
But it's also just respecting each other as artists, you know, from the musicians to the dancers, and just trusting in the process. Letting go control a little bit. I can be a total control freak, so it really was like just trusting the process.
Thank you. Do you want to show me? Want to go first?
Oh, we didn't.
Are we going to keep them? Are we going to keep them? I was getting excited now.
We'll show the video first and then we'll go.
Okay, so this is Melanie Marr. I got it.
We turned the air conditioner on, we thought it's getting hot.
Do you want to wait and talk to the neighbors?
And it's talking, I don't know, either way.
We can push it on. Let's leave it on. Turn it up.
Thank you. But then I saw Kenta perform his own work in a chocolate factory, I think, and it was a solo that he created. And I was just floored because he was moving so much. And I mean, I heard it and the sound was all over, but it was the movement that I thought, this is it, that's how I want to collaborate with a musician, because nothing else at that moment interested me of how to integrate music, so I did always in silence. I didn't know how to work with other people, so I chose my own body and the sounds that dance makes, which is a lot. And then I saw him move, I was like, oh, that's how it could work. And then I asked him to work with me for the music.
She came after the performance and she said, I'm not really interested in you to provide me sound score, but I want you to be on the stage with me. And I didn't exactly know what she meant. She didn't want my music, or are you hiring me as a dancer? Well, oftentimes, I mean, people comes up to me like, I love your dance. I mean, I just play with them. People say stuff. Or like somebody just say like, can you dance for me for my company? Like sometimes, I mean, they're joking around. So like I thought she was one of those people who just. But
it was more about, as in this collaboration too, it was more about finding vibration that is in sound and movement, and to work with that. Instead of, I listen, it's a listening practice that we do, but it has to do with vibration and movement. So at the end, it's not exactly what is being played or how it's being moved. It's really about finding the relationship of the sound and the movement that is more on the vibrational level. This isn't structured improvisation, as many things that we have done. We know where it is. We kind of have. Interesting was with the costume, there's always something going on. But most of it is just being there in the moment, using cables as structure and boundary, using whatever we have. But it's just of how we listen to each other. And that's kind of how our next collaboration came about from this. That was very much a piece that was thoroughly choreographed from the beginning to the end. But what worked for me was that we could go in and out of showing up somewhere, having just talked on the phone, have a gig at the Stone or somewhere, and be very much just relating of how we do our own work, relating together in a performance situation that is improvised, or rehearsing, and doing something that we know where it is in the venue. And it seems that that relationship of the spontaneity of it, feeding the ideas and the kind of how we want to work in a piece that is more set. Can I tell the Stone story? Which kind of, I think, showed a lot about how we work together. We had an informal gig at the Stone, which is a mostly music. Okay, it's formal. It was a gig, a formal gig at the Stone.
It was my gig. So I got the gig.
I'm trying to be kind. I'm going to the point.
Well, it's formal. I got the gig night for myself. So I asked Melanie, could you do a duet with me? That was right before we were taking off to Los Angeles. That was the night before making residence in Los Angeles. But night before I was staying at our house, and then, okay, just do it as part of this pre-op to this residency. So we did it, and then we went on.
Well, just when we got to the Stone, which is a mostly music video, and we worked it out, and we worked it out, and we talked about it, and I had, we were going to sit. I was going to sit the whole time, and he was going to sit the whole time. So we had this idea.
And we hid underground, downstairs before the show, and then we came up.
We were ready to sit down. We sit down.
It's dark.
It's dark. There was nobody except the doorman who took the tickets. Nobody showed up. There's not a single person in the audience. And first I could feel it was like, we had like 40 minutes or 45 minutes. And we did it anyway. We did the whole 45 minutes. And it was such a great experience because we learned so much from this performance for the piece that was going to come. about our performative choices, the energy when nobody's there, how we relate, how kind of the ideas were even more free because eventually there was no judgment from the outside at all. So it made me very secure that we could work together in any circumstance and whatever would happen. And I think that's really such a key point that you also mentioned a lot, this kind of trust or way of working. Because musicians and dance people have different cultures. They were sitting in this seat and the choreographers seem to be always sitting in this seat. Happen to know. Just saying, I don't know. But there is like a different culture in how we speak, how we work, how the codes that we use. And that can sometimes be really difficult of how to work together because we come from different cultures, if you know what I mean. And to find a way to work together anyway, when we have different ways of communicating about our ideas, that's very special and kind of hard to come by. And when my ears are open to the community and also younger artists starting to work with dance and music, often it's really hard. I had an idea, but I didn't know how to talk about it, and I said, could you please do this? But I already knew what I wanted, so then the musician is like, am I just doing what the choreographer is telling me? That there's sometimes not so easy to find each other. And when...
Can you give some examples?
When you know how dance people, we kind of hear it already, or maybe I should talk to myself. I kind of hear it already. I know in a way what it is that I need to hear if it is a piece that I'm choreographing. It's different when it's improvised, but when I have an idea, it comes with a sound. But it doesn't come with a totally specific, everything worked out sound, but it comes with something that I know. So when I ask somebody to collaborate, most musicians would think, I'm a collaborator, so I have 50-50, I'm creating it with you. But then when you're in the situation or in the studio, I kind of know already what it is, and then it's not that, no, that's not it either. Then it feels like it's not collaborative anymore, or there can be problems in how to get together in that one when you ask an independent musician, composer to do something, but you already hear something. How do you work? Where is the equality in it? Where can you refine equality in the artistic relationship?
Do you find in that situation though that you stick to that impulse of the sound with the musician, or do you at some point kind of relinquish for their ideas, or?
That's the nature of collaboration. You relinquish, you don't relinquish, you relinquish, you relinquish. That is how you work together. Sometimes I can't. There's certain things that I can, but I don't need to because it's agreed upon. Yeah. And then when you collaborate, we have to let it go or not let it go. But I think that's when you can work with somebody and make something, or you just can't. In this balance thing, it's not straight.
You like a Brad Pitt or Johnny Depp so much, and you did something. You're not Johnny Depp. What can you do? I mean, you live with that, or maybe you should just have to find something else.
Should be like Johnny Depp. We had a piece after this collaboration that was it's called Spaces and Bones, and we had it was at the Chocolate Factory, and after a couple of improvisations like this where Kenta used his fretless guitar, which he often uses and is known for, I didn't even ask him, but in my mind, the next thing was going to be with a fretless guitar because that's just what I've seen him. Stupid, don't ever assume anything. And I went in, I already let my head have images about things, and then we had our first meeting, and Kenta decided he's practicing the shamisen a lot, which is a Japanese traditional string instrument, and he was going to use the shamisen, which you sit on your knees for it entirely. And I'm into Kenta like moving. And all of a sudden Kenta was gonna sit. And I had a panic attack because I already had, where do you collaborate? Let it go. And then the whole piece was him sitting I was moved around. But he was sitting the whole time, and it brought such a specific physical quality to it, because sitting on your knees for 45 minutes is very difficult to do. And he started sweating, and it's really, you go through such a trial. And what I'm interested in when we collaborate is our presence, our physical presence on stage. So him actually going through something that dramatic, can you say that, painful, was great for the piece, because it made us it made us relate in a very deep way through our bodies.
Questions?
Do you work with other dancers also?
I do sometimes, yeah. The last piece, we were 3, and there was a musician involved, but the last piece we decided that I want to go back to the sounds of our physicality, so there was less sound involved. I use the mic a lot, and amplifiers and feedback sounds that we made. But
I was wondering, since you were, it was beautiful watching you dancing together, and I saw how the musician was moving, and I saw the physical relationship and the two bodies communicating on a physical body level. So I was wondering if that happens for the dancers, like this bodily communication, does that happen for you as a musician? Are you influenced by the sound that her body produces? Do you ever sort of focus on that? Like, is your acoustic perception
The sound of
influence the sound of her body, like her?
Not necessarily listening to her body or even watching her body. I'm not a big fan of following eyeball dancers. I'm trying to trying to connect in a different level. I mean, idea that sometimes it's more, sometimes it doesn't. And with her it worked, and it still works. And so no, not necessarily. I'm not really listening to her sound, but I was mentioning that earlier today. One of our first, or the first duet we performed, I call it duet, not solo. I got the gig at Issue Project, and the day before, night before, I was listening to this record done by this guitar player, improvised guitar player, Derek Bailey, and his companion, Japanese people, that's Miki Tanaka. They have a duet album, artist that dancer and guitar players duet album. And I was listening to it, and then there's a raindrops, and then occasionally you hear heavy breathing or footsteps, and it's clearly a duet. And I called up, hey, can you do something with me? Although we've never done anything together. That's how we started actually. So I wanted to have other presence in the performance. I wanted to duet with her. So I don't know if that was necessary. I was seeking I don't know, I'm not listening to her, but I'm entirely trying to engage with her live.
There was, when you're playing the fretless guitar, when there's such a vibrational sound with the guitar, I feel like it's much more on that level of vibration, but when you play the shamisen, which is an acoustic instrument, and I hear myself much more, and in Spaces and Bones, there were sections where I was stomping the hell out of this chocolate factory floor, and it was very much about sound and stomping. I felt the breathing more. It did have to do with the acoustic versus the electric guitar. There was a big difference in how I heard myself, and it encouraged myself. It encouraged me to do more, to be more on the duet level of sound. I don't know what comes first because memory is so linear, but I think it was that I found found a deer head on the street that Jonah Boker threw out of his space because he was tired of it, and it was a singing deer head that you plug into the wall, and it has big antlers, and it sings country songs. It's very spooky. And I found it on the street, and I had this inclination fire that this is what I need for my next piece. So he was at home, he was singing a lot, didn't know what to do with it. Then I had I cut off his antlers because I wanted to have the antlers in my head for channeling a deer. And so the bones were there, and then the spaces were there for the specificity of the chocolate factory space, and I wanted to reiterate to myself that it is about this space, and the bones, as in human bones, was the archaeology also of unearthing each of our, not each other's, but our separate cultures, because the piece had a lot to do with my Austrianness and Kenta's Japaneseness. At the end it did, but then in the beginning it did.
Any other questions or comments? So, I guess we could invite both panels up if you wish, and we could try to open the floor for a more general discussion. If you could have questions or comments.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, I'm
We didn't say our names. You said to say our names.
You just kept out of that.
So maybe I can go around and ask people in the audience, because you had some interest in coming here, if you had some of your questions answered, still some questions or some different questions that you might like to ask any of the panelists.
I have a question. I haven't heard a musician talk about, or I asked this really acclaimed musician who collaborated with a lot of dancers about how that relationship built over time with these choreographers. And he encouraged me to meet musicians of my generation because he believed that that was the way that it would really work, was that if you were working with people who lived in a similar sort of age range or set of experiences, that could really build your collaboration. And I think it's really interesting to note that like sort of feels similar to what I'm experiencing here. And I just wonder if you've thought about working with like people in different, or if you've had experience working in different generations of collaborator, or if like what that's like, or if your experience is really successful in this way, or what kind of advice you give in that way.
Well, I've worked with Anthony Braxton before, and he's much older than us. Is he? Yes, I think so, I'm pretty sure. Okay. And it was a very humbling experience. I think there's something when there's a lot of respect also for a person of a different generation who has accomplished so much. It was fun at times, and he's a very fun guy. But it's also a more student-like collaboration that I experienced. Though we came from different areas and there was definite work together. But I don't know, I felt like I'm learning so much. I was very which was different. Not that I'm not learning so much with kids, but it's different. I felt the student-like quality that was not equal, and it wasn't equal. And it was interesting, but I would also prefer in the long term or to work with somebody who I feel very, can you say power? I don't know, very equal in experience or more equal in experience in the different fields. And I think everything should be tried out and see how it is, diversity. But that was my experience.
I don't think there's one way of doing it. It's really about finding someone who you're compatible with and who you can share ideas with. I mean, with any relationship that you get into, if you're working with someone older, yes, there's going to be that age difference, and whether they see it more that I'm reaching down to you as opposed to on the same side to you. So much depends on the individual. I've worked with people who are much younger than me. I mean, most of my dancers are much younger than me. But it's really about what type of energy you set up as well. I think for the most part, I've tended to work with peers because they tend to know where I'm coming from, and we have a similar reference points in a way, and then we're also on the same financial, and that's really more what it is. I think a lot of times we're on the same financial. So, I mean, for example, I had two budgets. I had the dream budget, and I had the reality budget, and then I was probably very upfront with Kitty about that because I applied for a live music for dance grant. I was like, okay, if we get the grant, I can pay you this. If we don't get the grant, this is like the goal that I've set of what I can pay you, but it was significantly less, and would you be willing to work with that? I didn't get the grant. So, but I had a basic fee that she was kind of negotiating work out. But yeah, I think money also plays a factor into that, especially.
My first major collaborator, I was 21, he was 50. And most of my collaborators are older than I am. And those are closer in age than any of those relationships. I also worked with much younger people in the rock and roll vein.
Who was the other one?
Alan Ginsberg. Worked with him for 20 years. But I think the more important criterion, well, one thing about working with someone who's older, it's really good if you're like a younger artist and a little insecure, to be working with someone who's older at the top of his or her game and is just doing the work and is not worried about all that stuff that you are worried about when you're 21 years old. That's really a gift. That's a marvelous gift. But I think the most important criterion for collaboration is someone who has a generosity of spirit. I had an older collaborator again tell me at one point that you don't need to work with people who are ungenerous, let's say. You don't need to do that. There are other people who can.
I can tell you an example of how little you need to collaborate, although it might be true that there's a kind of unspoken rapport to begin with, just because of the scene that one comes from. But I worked with Robert Ashley in 1979, and we didn't know each other, but we had mutual friends. And once again, it was the scene at that time downtown, so everybody knew about everybody. And so we had a meeting, and we discovered in chatting, without talking yet about what we might do, that we were both interested in pie shapes and Venetian blinds. I'm not kidding. We didn't talk for more than half an hour. This came up. And so that made us feel really kind of jolly together. And then I told him that he could do whatever he wanted, but I needed to know from the music at the end of every 30 seconds. And there would be 3 sections of 6 minutes, 6.5, and I needed to know, because I was doing a very elaborate structure before I made any steps, and I knew that I was going to make these very specific time demarcations in the piece. And he went away and he made a score that I absolutely loved, which did tell me when the 30-second sections were up, and he used his voice, as he often did. There was a text with the music. And I considered it a completely successful collaboration with one half-hour meeting. You know, it was extraordinary. But again, I think there's something built in the industry. tell you one more example that's quite interesting because I was invited by the musician. In this case, it was Steve Lacy, who was a soprano saxophone player. He lived most of his life in Paris. And toured all the time, all over Europe, and here also, most of Europe. And he invited me and an African dancer who was living in Paris, mostly trained in Paris, but back and forth, to do a duet, 2 45-minute sections based on songs he wrote to lyrics Robert Creeley's poems. And we rehearsed some, but we made all instructions. We wrote many songs, and we did say something about each song, what we're going to do, and some of them were more sang than others. But the interesting part about this for me was that it wasn't a dance concert with musical accompaniment, and it wasn't a musical, it was more like a musical event with some dancing. And we were always all on stage together. And there was, at that time, Steve had borrowed from Kenneth Nolan, one of his typical paintings, a big chevron with different lines. And it would either sit on a pedestal on the stage or sometimes it was hung. It was usually centered, more or less, and we danced around it, and the musicians were somewhere else, down there, usually down. So, first of all, invited by the musician, so I didn't have to deal with that, and he completely trusted me and Elsa, also Woody Aston, the other dancer, to do whatever we wanted, and nobody ever told us what we should do. So we were completely free with that. And I always felt a little nervous about the possibility that it might come to the States for 2 reasons. One was that the costumer was French and put me and Elsa, but mostly me, in these silky, they looked like pajamas. They were silver, they were silky, and if I raised my arm, the sleeve would fall all the way down here, and they were flowing. Not exactly what I would have. And I just thought it wouldn't go over in the States. I thought that they would, silly. And the other thing was that this idea wouldn't happen in the States, that people would see it as a dance concert with music, no matter how it was presented. That's the format. In Europe, there really is a format of this balance of dancing and music, which I've never seen. That was a very different kind of thing.
I just want to announce this.
The
elevator stops at 8, so if anyone needs an elevator now is a good time.
I'd like to just say something about the idea of what collaboration is, and like just apropos of your question, I guess that we're still kind of gripping on that, what rapport is, and where natural rapport would occur socioeconomically and age-wise, and that would sort of be like kind of your go-to, like, yeah, it makes sense. But, collaboration can, of course, I mean, we're all artists, that's in this room, I think. So we have a sense of what, or we might have a sense of what collaboration is. And I think the most exciting kinds of collaboration are the most unlikely ones. The ones where there's no natural rapport whatsoever, where there's no meeting point, and you're dealing with conflict or apparent conflict, which is actually where the juice is, where the lessons are, and where the point of transformation occurs. And I think that with every juicy collaboration, you've got it, there's always a little conflict, right? Which is the cool part. That's where the part is like, okay, let's spark. Too much conflict, you come up against the brick wall. So it's always the dance between, and Edison and I had very little, we had almost no conflict, but we had, it was so different because we might have had a few sort of like, I'm not really sure where that is, but everything was incredibly fluid, and which was a really wonderful experience for us. And I think it would be really interesting for us to do something a little different, where maybe the stakes are raised, or they're a little bit different. There are all these kinds of collaborations that occur with complete and utter strangers. Now you've got like the internet and like digital stuff, like complete, randomness, chance, John, I mean, just throw it out, see what happens. And that could be a collaboration. You could collaborate going outside and just collaborate with the traffic yourself. Right? I'm going to be the active listener, and this is my orchestra. Hello. You know what I mean? I mean, like, your collaboration would just be your personal collaboration. And I think that it's so, and obviously, I'm not saying anything anyone probably doesn't know or think about, but I do think it's an important thing to sort of put out there about what rapport really is, and what it means to work within that context. So that's all I have to say on that.
Just have I think it's a comment. But I feel like there's something about, in particular, music and dance as these kind of monolithic entities that are also supposed to collaborate together. Right? There's this kind of very historical idea of these two forms having this kind of way of being involved with one another, and this expectation that they will be involved with one another. Brothers who talk about, Cunningham and work in silence and all of that. It's interesting to me. That's one of the reasons we talk about this discussion. It's like, where are we at with that relationship now? And one of the things that's so nice about hearing the pairs of you is that it's so human, the way that, like, it's very specific to each situation, to each project. It's very specific to each personality. It's like it's a relationship of two artists, and I don't know. There's something I find very humanizing about that. It's not about music and dance. It's about this relationship, why it came together, how it came together for this project, how it was realized. It's interesting because we did these studies projects on dramaturgy last year, dramaturgies, and it became the same thing. It wasn't about dance and dramaturgy. It was about, like, that person really gets along with that person, and they work really well together. So it's just, it always boils down to, like, individual chemistry.
On that note, can I ask if any of you have had experiences that just made me think of, like, unexpected collaborations? Like, I know there's a theatre company in Britain a few years ago that collaborated with a mathematician to make a work. And whether you guys have worked with actors or even people from scientific or financial or different backgrounds to influence work and make work together?
I curated something a few years ago. I don't know if ever do that, Kenta? We've known each other for years. We haven't seen each other in a long time. But I curated a collaborative series of, it was musicians and anything else. So we had musician and dancer, a very obvious collaboration. We had musician and visual artist. We had musician and poet. We had musician and flower arranger. We had musician and it's a live action painting, yeah. We had musician and martial art. Musician. So yeah, there were some that were, like, really amazing, and some that were like, but it was conceptually interesting. Like, let's see what happens, So I think there's a multitude of possibilities, and maybe it's something, and maybe it's not really about what the collaboration is, but the rapport and the conversation that is happening between the two, or in the group, or whatever. It's that's the thing that's the most interesting, is, like, what's being said and what's being discovered, not so much what the medium is. Kind of what you were saying.
And also maybe not what the product is,
right,
as even what the performance is, or collaborating with people in the sense of exchanging ideas and with scientists, and talking also to Celia, and I've talked a lot about what the ideas that one influences each other from people from different mediums, and how that then comes in performance 3 years later, or wherever it then shows itself in the actuality, but it's kind of the relationship to, the open relationship to exchanging ideas or letting ideas come about with any, it's a different form of collaboration. It's not focused on the performance of it, manifestation.
And can I just back to the sort of festival you were talking about, or how you curated? Did those performances then mostly take the form of musician playing music, arranging flowers, or whatever the thing was? Or did it kind of pop into something completely different, where you had musicians not necessarily playing music?
Yeah. Sometimes. Yeah.
Another way to think about this, now the discussion is going on, I'm suddenly reminded that in the 70s I was involved with a group called Grand Union, which is 6 or 7 or 8 individual choreographers who decided to try to perform without rehearsing, without having any rules. Sort of the ultimate, you can do whatever you want collaboration. And it worked for 6 years, and then it just didn't work. The word trust you were using earlier, that was essential to this situation. You had to stay in character all evenings, and every performance was only 2 hours at a time. And you just had to trust that you were in character, so if anybody threw some very personal material at you, which we did to each other all the time, you just pretended you were okay with it. And you acted out, or danced out, or spoke out. We could speak. It was not just dancing. But if I could jump, and around that same period in the 70s, I wanted to perform, but I was too afraid to perform by myself. And so I did 3 collaborations with 3 people I knew downtown. And in each case, our idea was to make dance together. And in each case, we didn't. In each case, by the time we were a few rehearsals into it, we both felt, these 3 different people at different times in separate situations, that we were compromising our own dance ideas and vision. Every time we said, no, I'll do this, and you do that, no, what about we do this? It just wasn't interesting. So we made material, but I made material for the 2 of us, and then he or she made material for the 2 of us, and so on. So we developed an evening of work, but it was not dance collaboration. And I bring this up because in this discussion I'm realizing that to work with a musician has always, I've never had what I consider a situation that didn't enrich the performance. Whereas when I tried to work with other dancers in that collaborative way of actually exchanging ideas or moves, it never worked for me, and I don't like it. And I've seen it elsewhere too. There's a period, I guess, in the 80s when there's a amount of funding for Eastern and Western collaborations. I remember being in San Francisco and seeing one, and thinking that these this musical group and this performer they're not doing anything different from what they do by themselves, and the situation is not enriching itself. It just seemed like a dud. And so I think the, if it's enriching, then it's good. If it's not, you should leave it alone. It's competitive, or it's compromising a vision. That's what I'm talking about. That's when it goes wrong. When you're compromising your vision.
Speaking of crossing over, and speaking of Grand Union, I was co-teaching some classes with Barbara Dilley, who had been a Cunningham dancer and so forth. And she asked me to move in a piece. And I don't dance. I mean, my hands, my ear, my vocal apparatus are fairly full of mind. The body is not full of mind, the rest of the body. But I did move with Barbara, and also with, I was working with Kenmore Elmsley, who was a librettist, opera librettist, and also sort of lyricist Broadway guy, and found myself an actor. Went into it working with him as a musician, but found myself in actually 2-act plays where I played a kind of character. So, John Cage had this thing where he said, if I hear something I don't like, or I find something I don't like, I go there and do it. In his case, it was at one point he didn't like music that came out of speakers. So then he made a piece for radios. And then, so, teaching with Barbara for a number of years, I found myself surrounded by Buddhists, and that's a Buddhist thing too. You find a sore spot, push on it. So, which is also psychoanalytical, right? So that I made a practice of going in those uncomfortable places at times. But it, again, it has to do with generosity of spirit and the openness of the collaboration and the sort of mutual